So my name is Ashanta, and I do publicity for Catalyst Press, and we're really excited to have you all here. Reading Africa is a week-long celebration that we started a few years ago with the idea of promoting the diversity of African literature. It's not just one thing, it's not just one place, it's not just one voice. And we hope that each year that idea becomes stronger and stronger. So you can join in by using the hashtag Reading Africa or Reading Africa Week across social media, and we'll be checking those out. Would love to see what you share, the books and authors and publishers that are doing the work that we champion and support. So I just want to introduce our moderator. Welcome Dr. Holly McGee, a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison and assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Holly McGee specializes in US history and African-American history, with an emphasis on Black women's intellectual history, comparative political activism in the United States and South Africa, and popular culture in the 20th century. Her secondary specialties include local histories of the American South, South African women's history, and oral histories. Currently, Dr. McGee teaches undergraduate courses in Black history and film, culture and counterculture, post-1929 American history, and modern South African history. She is also the author of Racial Anti-Apartheid, Internationalism and Exile, The Life of Elizabeth Mphuthumi, and founder of the nonprofit National Black Teachers Association. She also, as we've discovered just a few minutes ago, speaks a number of languages. So maybe she'll put that on display a little bit. So without further ado, Holly, take it away.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone. Bawoni, Kedu, Sanu, Agritu Na, Hoinan, Saubona, Sunbone Nonki, Ninjani, Bagiti. Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to this conversation this afternoon. Please do feel free to call me Holly. I am Dr. Holly McGee. I'm an associate professor at the University of Cincinnati here in the United States, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, specifically because of the areas in which I teach. While I do teach African-American history as a specialization within United States history, I'm fascinated within that realm and within South African history about the complications of history, race, migration, memory, belonging, identity. And so that's why I'm so excited about not just this conversation, but the panel that we have pulled together for this conversation. So what I would like to do, if I may, is I'll start with to my left on the screen and work our way through the panelists. I would really appreciate it if you would introduce yourself to the group as a whole, and then we'll jump right into this conversation. And I will start with, then I guess we will move our way down to Bridget Pitt. I see her on my screen. Bridget, you're next.
Thanks, Holly. And well, for us, it's good evening to everyone. For you, it's good afternoon. So yeah, I'm Bridget Pitt. I'm an author, amongst other things. I've written 4 novels. The 4th one is going to be published early next year, which is my first historical novel. And I also recently wrote a non-fiction book, which was a memoir with someone, not my own memoir, but theirs, which was a different experience. And my other interests include, I was a kind of social justice activist in the apartheid days, and now I've kind of embraced that to include environmental activism, which seems to be the issue of the day. So those are my literature, and environmental and social justice are my kind of big passions in life.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bridget, for joining the conversation. And then I guess I will move ourselves, we'll move over to Mphuthumi and Ntabeni. Please do introduce yourself, sir. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Hi, good evening to everyone, and good afternoon to that side of the Atlantic. My name is Mphuthumi, but feel free to call me Mpush because most people call me that. I'm trained in built environment. There used to be architecture, but after that, I have a deep interest in history, especially the history of the province that I come from, which is the Eastern Cape in South Africa. The early history of it, which is the colonial frontier history, is my interest. I have invested in reading it for the past 10 or 20 years or so, I don't know. But I have written 2 historical novels based on the characters that were living during the British colonization of that area. And because I had felt that in all the historical documents that I have encountered, that history has always been told from the point of view of the British and the colonizers, and never from the point of view of the Xhosas. So which is the reason why I decided to start writing this, what I call the trilogy, The River People.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mphuthumi, or Mpush, as you have invited us to call him.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And then I guess I will turn it to Tope. Tope, you're up next, please.
Thanks so much, Holly. My name is Tope Folarin. I'm the executive director at the Institute for Policy Studies, which is a think tank in the United States. I've been executive director for the past year and a half. I also serve as the land and visiting lecturer of creative writing at Georgetown University. I am also a novelist. My debut novel, A Particular Kind of Black Man, was published in 2019 by Simon & Schuster. I'm currently working on my second. It's truly a pleasure to be here, and I'm really eager to start this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tope. I'm particularly interested in us having this conversation about hyphenated lives, hyphenated identities, and I'm looking forward to us bringing in a particular kind of Black man into that conversation because of exactly the types of conversations that you have in your novel. So for our last, I believe, well, we've got 2 more panelists, I believe. Shameez, you are up next.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. I'm Shameez Papathanasiou. I am a civil engineer whose first loves have always been tied between problem solving and fantasy fiction. And so now I get to create problems and solve them in magical worlds, which is a lot of fun. My debut novel, The Last Feather, was published in July this year by Flame Tree Press and Simon & Schuster.
Thank you, Shameez. Thank you. All right, well, let's jump into this conversation. Now that we know who all of our speakers are, who all of our panelists are, the way that I normally conduct conversations, whether they are, formal ones with students in classrooms or informal ones, is I really like these things to develop a little bit more organically. So rather than pose a particular question to a specific panelist, what I'd like to do is really just kind of delve into this realm of writing. Because as writers, all of you, whether you are novelists, whether you are academic writers are always making choices. You are always making choices, whether you are choosing how you are representing yourself, a culture, an identity, an idea, a theme, you're always making choices. And these are really critical things that eventually one has to answer for, right? You can't please everyone with your writing. You probably can't please half of the people with your writing. But what you will do most of the time is you'll turn someone on to some idea or some theme that's incredibly important. And so what we're dealing with today, oh, I'm sorry, what? Is everyone muted? Okay, fantastic.
Right.
So what I really want us to jump into today is I want us to talk about this theme, a theme of history, race, belonging, this notion of memory, particularly when it comes to African identities. Who is African? What is African? From my perspective as an African American, I do say that I live a hyphenated existence. As an African American, I find myself in a very particular place in the United States, right? I find myself in the space of, as an American, I am not necessarily an American, I'm a hyphenated American, but outside of the United States, I am an American. And so I find myself wondering, I'd love to just throw this question to everyone, to all of our panelists. I would love to throw this question to our panelists. Why do we and how do we separate ourselves from one another? Why do we continue to do this? Why do we separate ourselves from one another with these hyphenated existences? Is a hyphenated existence important, necessary, crucial, or is it simply a way to continue to divide people from one another? And I'd love to open that up to all of the panelists, and you're welcome to answer that at your leisure. Feel free to unmute yourselves and jump into the conversation.
First of all, incredible set of questions, Holly. Thank you so much for asking them. And it's something I grapple with in my writing all the time. I should say, it's funny, when I started my writing career, this is an important year for me because I published my first short story 10 years ago. November of 2012 in a journal called Transition Magazine, which started in Africa. It started in Uganda and was a wonderful publication in Uganda for many years, and then moved to Nigeria, and then eventually moved to Harvard. So the journal itself has this like interesting history that sort of incorporates African experiences and African American experiences and American experiences. And my first piece was published there. And then a few months later, I was fortunate enough to win the Kane Prize, which started this whole series of conversations about my identity. As it happens, I was born in America. Both of my parents are from Nigeria. And so I qualified for the Kane Prize because I was the son of immigrants, but I was the first person who was not born in Africa to win the Kane Prize. And so for the next year, during, one of the great sort of advantages of the Kane Prize is the opportunity to travel around the continent and also spend time in America. And I had so many conversations with people in which they were asking me about my identity and are you African and where are you from and what gives you the right to sort of talk about, sort of African issues. And I thought it was important because one, my perspective was that I offered an important sort of set of experiences because I'm a member of the diaspora and I am the son of immigrants who found their way to America and were desperate to make a life for themselves in America. And so I grew up in a household that was more or less Nigerian, but I also grew up in America. And so I had spent my childhood sort of trying to reconcile these two very different cultures and come up with an identity that made sense for me. And the way that I thought about it is that most of my friends, nearly all of my friends, it seems as if they were handed an identity card when they were born. So their parents said to them, this is who you are, this is whose tribe you belong to, this is how you ought to comport yourself in the world. And in my case, my parents handed me an identity card that didn't quite make sense in my context. And then people I met also said, no, this is who you are. And so I had to construct an identity. And that was, nobody was telling me as I was growing up, it's construct your identity, that's something you have to do. I spent a lot of time being confused, but I think by the time I became a young adult, I said, okay, now I have the option of deciding who I am. And for the first time in my life, I saw it as a kind of advantage and not something that would weigh me down. And so, and I think writing for me was a key part of that. Was one of the reasons I write is to figure out who I am and figure out my place in the world. And so I think the conclusion I reached is that, my identity can be capacious enough to include my parents, sort of place of birth and their cultural traditions, and also the things that I prize about living in the United States, and that there's space for both. And I think there's so many more of us now, which is to say kind of third culture kids or kids who live on the hyphen, as it were, between two cultural experiences. And to not, the temptation is to say, I am one or the other. And I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to say that I am both. I am both and more. And that's what I try to capture in my book, was the kind of both and more experience, to say that it's okay to kind of inhabit both spaces and take parts from both that align with who you are internally, and also to try to find something new as well. So that is a process that was facilitated by by writing and learning more about the world and learning more about myself in the world as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that, Tope. I really appreciate the perspective of, I love that you say living on the hyphen, as it was, like individuals, these, what did you refer to yourself as? Did you call yourself a third culture kid?
That's one class, it's an academic classification. I'm not sure if I'm a third culture kid, but I am certainly, it's maybe, I think the jury's still out, but I do think of myself as somebody who is, in certain ways very Nigerian. The funny thing is that whenever I go to Nigeria, they'll say, oh, you're not Nigerian, you don't do this, you don't do that. Right. And then the same thing happens here as well. So, but there are certain parts of me that are very Nigerian. Right. And then there are parts of me that are also African-American, parts of me that are drawn from their cultures as well. So, I embrace that. In a way, before I thought I have to jettison parts of myself that don't align with this or that. But I embrace all parts of my experiences. I think it's a wonderful privilege to be able to, sort of interact with all of these cultures and have some sense of connection to all these cultures as well.
Right. Thank you for saying that. I think the mistake that we make, and by we I mean human beings, and in society, wherever we are, we think that ethnicity, race, we think that those things are, it's a zero-sum game, and it's not. Ethnicity, race, belonging, we believe that these are discrete categories when they really are not. And I think that your experience, particularly as a child of immigrants who is finding his place. I remember growing up in Arkansas, I was always too black for the white kids and too white for the black kids, right? And find yourself in that space where, being an African-American going to Africa, I'm too American for the Africans, but, too African for the Americans, right? And so I really appreciate you pointing that out. And I would love to kind of transition this to some of our other panelists. I mean, it is not missed I'm sure anyone who is looking at our panel can see that we have a very diverse panel, and I'd love to have some of our non-Indigenous African panelists kind of chime in on this, because I would love for us to kind of change this conversation. How do we discuss and understand belonging in an African sense if one is not phenotypically Black? Those of you who are living on the continent, connected to the continent, who may in some ways perceive yourselves as being more African than people who are living hyphenated existences in the diaspora. I'd love to hear your thoughts about belonging, identity, and culture. Bridget, please.
Okay, Holly. One of the things I've been reading recently is Bayo Akamalefi, who's got some wonderful thoughts on identity. And one of the things he says is that humans are not things in a territory. Humans are a territory. And I really love that, because I think wherever we find ourselves, I think we construct a territory around ourselves, which is collective and very specific, depending on your particular experience of it. And I think white South Africans, I was raised in a very alienated society. I was raised in the height of apartheid, and my parents my dad's side came to South Africa in 1820 with the British sort of colonial influx at that time. So they were kind of, fourth, fifth, sixth generation South Africans. But we totally identified with England. I mean, I grew up with a very kind of English orientated sort of childhood. And yet I also was very connected to where I was living, obviously, because that was my kind of experience, of the weather and the people and the languages and the, all of that. And then when I first became sort of involved in the anti-apartheid struggle, there was a sudden embracing, well, actually, we are African, we're all African. And this understanding of what is Africa, and, the real understanding of what colonization had created in Africa. And I think then that was sort of followed by a kind of period of anxiety of, well, can we really call ourselves African? Because we came here as interlopers, we came here as thieves. We came here as invaders. So, can we claim that right to be African? And yet I certainly don't feel English remotely anymore. So I think, I think as white South Africans, we just, to varying degrees, because every white South African has a different take on this probably. But for me, one lives with that discomfort. And one tries to be in the land as an authentic way as you possibly can, while kind of acknowledging the discomfort of your history and your place and your continued privilege as a white person. But certainly my latest novel, which is, delving into kind of British colonialism, I think was very much an attempt to really have a conversation with my ancestors, who I'd kind of been repudiating. I'd kind of condemned them as being terrible people because of what they'd done. And I spent a lot of time looking at diaries, and I think eventually came to terms with the fact that they weren't really terrible people. They were just part of a terrible project, and they were just kind of playing out their roles in this terrible project in the way that people do in history. Some were bad and some were good, and some mostly were a mixture. I think there's a lovely line in Bettina Gapper's beautiful book about Out of Darkness, Shining Light, where she says, you know, you can be a bad person and do good things, and you can be a good person and do bad things. So for me, a lot of coming to terms with being a white South African has been, you know, just embracing that kind of complexity and ambiguity of identity. So it's not a finished project. I mean, you know, I won't finish it in my lifetime, but I think it's an ongoing process.
I appreciate this, Bridget. I really do, because it is an ongoing project as a metaphor for all of us. I don't think there's a person on this call who is in a complete place of peace with their country or their nation's, you know, founding myths or founding ideas or their mores and values. And there's no one who's at a place of perfect peace with this. And so it is a work in progress for all of us. And I appreciate that you're saying that you admit that, you know, there is this place of discomfort in which one must exist. But I would really like for us to think about ways on this call where we can push past that living in a place of discomfort and turning that into actionable steps that can actually improve, if not our lives, the society around us and the people in which we live. I see, Shameez, you've got a look on your face like you wanted to contribute to this conversation. So I'd love to make some.
Yes, so it's always been a very confusing thing for me. My surname, Patel, on its own at least, is stereotypically Indian, but that Indian family comes from my father's side, whereas on my mother's side, there's a mixture of Malaysian and Indonesian, and my dad's side as well, there's Turkish, and there's so many cultures all sort of blended into one. And in South Africa, at least, when ticking a race, you get black, white, Indian, and colored. For a long time, that was all there was. And as a child, I identified as colored instead of Indian. And there was always a bit of confusion because you're a Patel, you look like a Patel, so to speak. And I'm not sure how much you know about South Africa, but even within South Africa, there's a lot of division amongst the different cultures, depending on where you're from. And being colored is mostly found in Cape Town. Cape Town Indians tend to be different from Durban Indians or Joburg Indians. And a lot of our family history was not recorded. So it's hard to really know where we are from because we came in as slaves or as people that were fleeing their countries. And so all we know is that we don't partake in all the cultures that you would if you were stereotypically Indian. I have no connection to India as a country. And yet I'm South African Indian. It is a strange place to be, and we keep learning and unlearning and navigating the path that we're on. And I found with fiction is that I wanted to write a character that was Indian, but that also wasn't rooted in her culture, because not all brown people are stereotypically rooted in their cultures. And it's beautiful when it is written that way. I appreciate every single person of color that has written fiction where it is focused on a world created through their culture. But not every person of color can relate to that, because some of us have been thrown around so many times. All we know is that we're brown. We've got brown skin, but we're not necessarily part of any culture. So that is the angle that I took.
Right. And I really appreciate that, Shameez. I think a lot of people, they underestimate how much a writer brings themselves to their work. I think a lot of times people think of, you know, novelists or writers, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, they think that it is all this very like esoteric, imaginative thing, when really there's always a kernel of that author in that piece, right? There's always a kernel of some truth, some pain, some history in that piece. And I really appreciate you bringing up the fact that it's a difficult thing to navigate if you're not necessarily directly connected to a culture. And I would love to, you know, kind of bring and push into this conversation because specifically because of the way that you utilize culture, in your the Broken River tent, when you have this character who is, because of his culture, he's able to connect with this ancestor, right? He's able to connect in this imaginative way to rediscover himself and his history. And I would love for you to talk to us a little bit more about the ways in which you were able to lean into this culture that is so inherent in you and bring that to the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very glad you asked me this question this way, because I was thinking of that myself, that when I write overtly from the closer point of culture's view, because I feel that in the past it has been unhealthily silenced, especially when it comes into history. And then you don't find it in these history books and all that stuff because of the colonial thing. But before I answer properly on that, the reason, in actual fact, I answered your call to be on this panel at this late stage is because of this topic, because this fluidity and instability of identity is very interesting to me. Because, like, for instance, when I grew up in the Eastern Cape, I grew up automatically thinking that I'm Xhosa. And then I took that for granted, and so I'm Black African, I'm Xhosa. And then I realized itself being a Xhosa is not a homogeneous thing. It's a collection of different people. Like my people came from currently on the KZN, and they were Hlubis, and like strictly speaking, technically speaking, they should be called Zulu now instead of Xhosa. But because they came to the Eastern Cape in the early 19th century, and they are speaking Xhosa now, they are called the Amaxhosa, and then we are all collected as Amamfengu, the people who flee from the KZN and all those things. So it became interesting to me when I realized then, when I was reading history, that in actual fact, I'm not even as Xhosa as I think I am Xhosa. It's just like a group of people. There's actually, to be honest, no such thing as Xhosa. It's just a group of people that happen to speak one language, which today we call it Xhosa, but that's a discussion for another day. So even myself, when I got to the university, and then I realized that, okay, I'm not just Black and Xhosa, there's something else more into this, because by being African, I thought, but this was my land. And then I realized, okay, there were people now, the Khoisan people, which we call the first people in this land. And then they themselves, the so-called Nguni people, my people, were the ones responsible for dispersing them and cruelly and killing them also and taking their land before the British came, you understand? And then the complexities keep piling. The more, the more you grow up, the more you think of things about your identity also. And then when I lived a little bit in the UK and then ended up marrying a Scottish woman. And then now my children are half Scottish. And then now I'm interested in their identity now, because when they are in the UK, they are called the mixed race, which is fine. And then and when they are here in South Africa, they are called colored. And then they're like, what is color? They have no idea what is color. And I'm like, unfortunately, as much as I would like to say my kids are colored, but they don't understand the colored culture. They see themselves as being Xhosa and say they understand only mixed race. And so they get confused when a person speaks to them with Afrikaans, but they look colored. And then the other kids, and they stay in Cape Town, and the other kids look at them and it's like, what kind of a colored are you? Can speak Afrikaans? And then things get complicated and all those things. So the fluidity of the identities is quite an interesting thing. So yeah, I get it. I get it. So I want to say, like, we are all in a kind of a discomfort zone when it comes to identity. And at the end of the day, you yourself, I think, has to just choose on how you see yourself. And perhaps how you see yourself depends basically, actually depends more on what culture you grew up under. So for me, honestly, what you call yourselves after that, it's a matter of personal choice.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Mphuthumi. I really do appreciate you pointing out the fact that it really is. The unfortunate reality is that everyone on this call is the unintended beneficiary of, broken systems of our ancestors, right? Like beneficiaries of this incredibly broken system. And so I think what is important, however, is that what we need to do is we need to normalize these conversations. I came, I grew up in the Deep South in the 80s and 90s, where everything was only black and white, right? Everything was only black and white. There was no in between. We did not talk about race. We did not talk about culture. We simply accepted the injustices and the indignities. But now we are living in an era where young people have an incredibly expanded vocabulary when it comes to the ways in which they can identify themselves, the ways in which they identify the cultures that they identify with, and the communities that they beholden themselves to. And so what I'd really like for us to do is, as older people on this call, to really kind of demystify some of those broken systems that we've inherited, specifically how we think about hyphenated realities in the larger scheme. And so here's a question that I'd love to throw out to the group. It's a question that I love, and everyone, you feel free to just jump in as you see fit, because I see a little bit of this in everyone's writing, and it pops out. I think it just pops out because this is the way that we are coded as human beings. When it comes to, here's a question: why is it that Afro-European, let me say this, why is it that Afro-European identities are seen as sacrosanct? They are things that are discussed with a sort of reverence, both in the academy and in popular novels and literature. Why are those seen as sacrosanct, whereas Euro-African identities are seen as taboos? These are things that we do not discuss. Why are there such different receptions and levels of comfort with accepting stories or realities or truths from individuals who are Afro-Europeans as opposed to Euro-Africans? Do you see a divide? Tiffany Forval is a colleague of mine from University of Wisconsin-Madison. She wrote a book about Afro-Germans. And I remember when Tiffany was coming through the program, the idea that she would be writing about Africans in the diaspora in non-traditional locales was seen as something that was very, everyone was very excited about it, right? Oh, we really want to talk about Africans in the New World. We want to talk about Africans in Germany, Africans in the Francophone world. We want to talk about Africans here. But I also have another colleague who wanted to talk about the white South African experience. No one wanted to hear that story. And so when I say these hyphenated existences, why is it that, and so the question that I'm asking is, why is it that we hold certain identities as sacrosanct and then others are shameful that we don't discuss? So why are Afro-European identities sacrosanct while Euro-African identities are much more problematic?
Can I jump in here, Holly?
Please, Bridget.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. Actually, something I was thinking about myself a little when I was thinking about this panel. I guess it's really a case of history, in the sense that Afro-Europeans, came there as guests or in some instances as refugees, whereas, well, certainly originally Euro-Africans came as colonizers. So the whole kind of way that one is positioned in the society is fairly different. I mean, for me, something I reflect on a lot is, I grapple with kind of being African, and yet if I was a kind of fourth or fifth generation American, it wouldn't even occur to me to doubt that I was American, and or to doubt my legitimacy as an American. Whereas I do feel that I need to question my legitimacy as an African just because of our history.
I'm not sure if I fully understood the question, but just to comment on what Bridget said, I don't doubt that I'm African, or South African at least. I do sort of wonder what rights I hold to cultures and which topics I can comment on, because as I said, I'm technically Indian, I'm technically colored, but am I colored enough to write about the colored experience, which is very personal to them, or the struggles that colored people have obviously experienced and gone through? And I think, as you mentioned, the difference between the two options is that it is a very fine line between stealing someone else's struggle, in a sense. A white person in South Africa, which was the example that you used, may not or would not likely have had the same struggle experience that a lot of South Africans have experienced, and it may get brushed over or done incorrectly, which makes it a dangerous thing, and it can be done properly, but people are just wary about it because you're telling a story that they would rather hear from the oppressed, so to speak. And I think that is the difference. Feel free to tell me if I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong, Shameez, and I really appreciate this because this allows us to get into what I think is a really important conversation. Who has the right to talk about certain things, specifically in your storytelling, right? Who has the right to discuss certain topics? For example, I'm a Black American who writes South African history. When I was doing my book research, plenty of times I had South African historians tell me that I didn't have the right to write that was something that needed to be written by a South African historian. Well, if there's no one who's doing that history, does that mean that history simply goes untold until like 50, 100 years from now, until someone else is positioned to do it? And so I'd love to know from the panelists, what were, if you don't mind making yourself vulnerable and sharing, what are some of the things that you kind of had to challenge yourself with in your writing, whether it came from, people that you were talking to saying that you didn't have the right to do this? What were some ways that you saw that you had to push yourself to get to a place of comfort with this writing?
The thing I would say is, I think I maybe had to push myself in a different direction, because there is what you described, the phenomenon where some people might say, you can't write about this is not your experience. But then there's the other side, which says you can only write about your experience as well. And I'll be more specific in my case. I think there's an expectation in the West, which is to say America and the UK, if you're a writer of color, to write about sort of horrible things that have happened to people of color, right? And there's an entire marketplace for that. And there are publishing pathways for that as well. So in my case, if I were to write, some war epic about stuff that happened in Nigeria, or something about the plight of African Americans, the publishing world will say, oh yeah, that's great. But the moment you begin to write about like an individual story, which I did, somebody who is grappling with all kinds of things, who is trying to figure life out, there is a long tradition in sort of white literary culture in America and the UK of talking about the individual experience, the kind of coming of age, getting to know myself, getting to know society as well story. But that tradition is developing in communities of color. And the publishing world is lagging way behind in terms of recognizing not only the publishing world, but the world of criticism as well, which is crucial to our livelihood and our success as writers. And critics, it seems, aren't positioned to kind of contextualize some of the work. I think writers have far outpaced the capacity or willingness of critics to engage with the work in a really interesting way. So what you described is certainly the case, and something that a lot of people deal with as well. But I also want to sort of spotlight the struggle that some writers who are wanting to write outside the kind of expected pathways for, and that extends beyond, if you're a writer of color who's writing sci-fi and fantasy, I don't think criticism is caught up with what's happening in those realms. If you're a writer of color who's writing romance, I don't think the world is necessarily caught up. So it's a wonderful thing that we're all sort of being ambitious in writing in these new genres. The irony, of course, is that we grew up reading, all of us, romance and fantasy and sci-fi and coming of age stories. And when we start writing about that, the publishing world says, no, write about, slavery, and which is an incredibly important thing to write about, right? Write about, sort of war in Africa, an incredibly important thing to write about, but there are other things to write about as well. And so I can say personally, I was in a position where I sent my manuscript out to like agents and editors, and like, oh, Tope, we think you're a great writer. Why don't you write about like, so there's conflict, maybe you write about the Nigerian Civil War. There was like, they were trying to sort of shoehorn me into writing about something they felt they could market. And I think we have a responsibility to continue to push past those kinds of restrictions as well.
Well, I mean, because it's a lot easier to understand the child of immigrants, Nigerian immigrants, who's talking about the immigrant experience. That is a very discrete category that people are comfortable with. But if you are a Nigerian immigrant who is talking about the struggle of, learning to be African-American in the midst of Africans, and that coming of age, like a young Black boy's coming of age, nobody wants to talk about that in the United States.
Exactly.
Needed, right? That's seen as not a complicated story. So I appreciate you I appreciate you bringing that up. I saw both Bridget and Shameez had something they wanted to say. Shameez, please, because I know you're going to talk about romance. Please tell me. It was
well, just to comment on what Tope said is that what if you are a Nigerian boy from immigrants and you just want to tell a love story? It doesn't have to be rooted in your identity. Even that is who you are, and you're falling in love with someone. It could be someone of any race, and your race or your religion does not have to be the conflict in the story. Because often in most general rom-coms and fantasy novels where the characters are white, that is not a focus. Whereas in every story where there's a person of color, it's, oh no, she's Muslim, he's not, that's a problem. Or, oh, black and white, the father's racist. Sometimes brown people can just exist and have fun, and it doesn't have to come down to their struggle.
Right. Everything is not a struggle just because you have pigment in your skin. So, Mphuthumi, please, Mpush, I see your hand, please.
Yeah, I wanted to actually echo what Tope was saying, and kind of again complicated with the South African side, because here in South Africa, you find that in our publishing world, they are still uncomfortable talking about the past histories because of the wrongs and all those things. And then everybody is kind of trying to encourage us, but no, man, you must write a positive story on how you overcome poverty, or how you understand they like stories whereby somebody flee from war and made something of themselves, what they call personal stories. Whereas I have nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong about that, but some of us choose to write in a sense that personalizes history also. And like, for instance, myself, I struggled to get a publisher for my first book for a very long time. And luckily, immediately Black publishers started emerging. And then that's when they were the ones who became interested in those stories. And the stories that go deeper into our history. I mean, I understand perhaps the reluctance of the white publishers, because the majority of a reading culture, reading people who buy who buy books in South Africa are white, so they have to cater for their market. But then the funny thing again, which you're gonna laugh perhaps, when the global publishing houses are interested in the South African stories, they are, of course, interested in the stories, your J.M. Coetzee, your Damon Galgut, and all those things. And then, like, they haven't gotten into the stories that the Black writers are writing in South Africa, which is quite strange to me. I'm not sure why, but perhaps somebody here has an answer for that.
Well, I certainly don't have an answer for that. I know when it comes to, well, I certainly don't have an answer for it. I would say that the only thing that that might speak to it is, like, global publishing companies are looking at the fact that South Africa has the largest number of white Africans out of any other country on the continent, right? I think, like, by the late 90s, there were like 5 million white folks on the continent as a whole, and like the vast majority of those were actually in South Africa. So I would imagine that the global publishing world is really catering to that small minority, which looks like like, proportionally speaking, it looks really huge. I don't see that trend continuing, though, and push, and I'm looking forward to that trend not continuing. So I would love to shift this conversation just a little bit to the topic of the topic of memory. The topic of memory, specifically the topic of memory, because as writers, again, you're always making decisions, but you're also leaving something behind, right? Everyone who has written something, this will be around decades, generations after we're gone, whatever book you've written, whatever article you've written, whatever novels you've written. And so what I would love to do in the time that we have, I'd love for each one of you to, maybe share with us a little bit, what is the, imagine 100 years from now in the future, some student has a project that they have to write, right? They have to write something about some, maybe it's, I don't know, it's some American writer, some South African writer, something, and they come across your work. They come across your work and they read your work. They got to do a report, a book report on your work. What would you hope that student gets out of the readings that they've done of yours that they would share with everyone else? So if you look at your work as a totality, the memory of your work, what will be the major themes that you feel you're leaving behind, the major conversations that will be had, the things that are important that you want to pass down to other generations, that you could pass down to other generations? Anyone, feel free. I saw a smile on Bridget's face.
Wow, that's quite a challenging question, because I don't really imagine anybody, you know, investigating my work in 100 years' time.
No, Bridget, no.
But I think what I would like to leave is a sense of complexity. You know, that I think Anna Tsing has this lovely phrase, a rush of troubled stories, that she talks about how, you know, identity is a, none of us have got a kind of pure identity. We're all, she talks about the term contaminated. We're all contaminated by history. And the only way you can tell, you can investigate that contaminated history is through what she describes as a rush of troubled stories. And I don't think they have to always be troubled. I think just a rush of stories is how we kind of can throw a mirror onto the kind of incredible complexity and joy and diversity and wonder and terror and horror and, you know, kindness and unkindness of the times that we live in, or the times that we choose to write about, you know, whether it's contemporary or historical through a contemporary lens. You know, I think I just want to leave a sense of complexity and some redemptive kind of humanity, you know, not in the sense of a happy ending, but in the sense of, as humans, we find a way of being kind to each other and kind of getting through whatever life throws at us.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you. Tope or Shameez or Mphuthumi?
It's a good question, because you know, the thing, I think all writers get to a place where you think, you say to yourself, I'm kind of writing about the same thing over and over in different guises, you know, maybe different plot lines or different characters, but it seems like I have certain writerly obsessions. And as I'm sort of knee deep in writing my second novel, it occurred to me that my grand obsession is with the fact that I've come to believe that reality wasn't constructed for my benefit. And when I was younger, I thought there was something wrong with me. I'm like, what's wrong with me? I don't feel like I fit in. There's something wrong. Like, I need to change everything about myself in order to kind of fit in and survive this crazy society that doesn't seem to have a place for me. And I don't think it was until I was in my mid to late 20s when I said, no, this reality wasn't constructed for someone like me to thrive and feel comfortable, right? That's the point of this. Like, the point of the way this society has been constructed is to ensure that one class of people feel good and comfortable and they are able to thrive, and everyone else feels subsidiary. And so I think that my fiction is about sort of redefining reality in a way that sort of has space for more people to feel comfortable. And I think that's a responsibility that we all have. If we are sort of obsessed with the idea of people learning how to become more comfortable in this reality, which is to say people of color, women, what have you, then we're also asking these people to leave essential parts of themselves behind in order to conform. But if we say, on the other hand, no, there's something wrong with the way that reality has been constructed, and we have to do the essential work of reconstructing parts of reality so that it has space for more people who are different, I think we will have done a great job this century. And so I think that my fiction is obsessed with that question. And when somebody comes across my work in a century, I hope that they'll see somebody who's actively deep thinking about that sort of idea.
For me, I think what I'm actually striving for, of course, I am very concerned about memory and how it is interpreted, and because I come from a situation whereby our history was written by those who were prejudicial against us. So my strive always is to kind of in my books to reposition the voices that that are telling or have told our history. So if perhaps it could be seen as a small dot where that kind of repositioning of those voices, including the richness of our oral history as an African people, that is should be included and into the history that we live in, or that is being told. So yeah, for me that would be the much more kind of interesting thing if it would happen that, but somehow one of my a line I said or a book I wrote would be like, oh, we know that this repositioning of the voices of our history started around about then. So I'll be happy, but well, it is what it is.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think we would all like to believe that someone will find one of our works and say, "Oh yes, this was the Holy Grail." Like if they only knew what they didn't know then. Push. Shameez, what about you? What happens when someone comes across your work a century from now?
Oh gosh, if someone comes across my work a century from now, I hope that they have a good time. I write genre fiction, I write fantasy and rom-coms. It's often looked down upon in the literary industry. It's seen as sort of the lesser literature, less academic, less serious, which I don't think is true. I think that fantasy and romance deals with so many important topics, a lot of personal issues, and fantasy especially, most fantasy novels have an underlying theme that good will always defeat evil. And it is and will always be my favorite thing that the underdogs will win in the end. And I think that even 1,000 years from now, or how many ever years from now, there will be disagreements, there will be trouble in, maybe it's not race-based, maybe it's class-based, maybe it's based on, I don't know, something else. People will find a reason to fight. And I hope that my work gives them a place to escape to and gives them the hope that they need to continue fighting for what they believe is right.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Shameez. It looks like we are getting very close to our 1 hour mark. I'm very excited about the conversation. I hope that this can continue, but I know that we have to bring this to a close. So what I would love to do is maybe open it up to the individuals who are in the room. If there's anyone that has a burning question or a burning a thought that they would like to share, or anything that you would like to ask a panelist, now would be a wonderful time for you to unmute yourselves, and I'll ask you to turn your camera on as well, just so we can see with whom we are conversing. So please do. Anyone? One of you.
May I ask something? It's like, yeah. I want to come back to the very last issue about romance, and I want to then jump right back into Shakespeare. I mean, what else is somebody like Romeo and Juliet? Now, that's exactly the point. Is, I mean, whether you are African or whether you are British, if you can write a story that grips people, is that not what all of us in the end would want? I'm just curious what you think about that.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. I think there are universal themes that we all know about. But then, of course, every universal theme has a background to it. So sometimes that what makes a book, any book, is not only those universal themes. Of course, it's how you tell them and what I call a unique voice. And I always joke, but not joke per se, by saying that in actual fact, almost every story has been told. The only thing we're interested in now is in unique individual voices that are culture-based in where you are as an individual, how you interpret universal themes that have been written since Homer started writing in the Western world and in the other cultures and all that stuff. So yeah, that's actually a joke I usually make by saying that most stories, if not every stories, have been told. But what is most important now are the voices of the experiences, that because as human beings, we experience similar things, but how the experiences are interpreted depends on our identities, cultural background, traditions, individual, how we think, and blah, 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 and all and all and all. Thank you.
I actually have a question for the panelists. I'm curious if there's a book or author besides your own work that you would recommend for people who are interested in kind of learning more about African place and identity, and authors who are really doing that well, in your opinion, be it fiction, nonfiction.
I'll jump in. As a fantasy author, I've had, oh gosh, I have the privilege of so many Black women entering fantasy. There is so many stories that are rooted in different cultures around Africa, but with an added whimsy of magic. And most recently, the authors that have been on my mind is Ayana Gray, which she wrote the Beasts of Prey series, Namina Fauna, which is Skin of the Sea. It's one of my favorites because it's a story about mermaids, essentially a Little Mermaid retelling. But instead of it just being mermaids, it's based on African folklore and mythologies. And it also touches on the very serious topic of slaves, because this mermaid is the one that captures their souls after they've fallen overboard. And she somehow balances this beautiful, fine line between dealing with something so incredibly serious and it's still feeling very magical and romantic. And in some cases, there was some humor as well. And also, Namina Fauna, who wrote the Merciless Ones, was also great fantasy author. And if you want to read fiction, fantasy fiction by people of color who are writing about their identities, but in a magical way, sort of putting a spin on it, I would definitely recommend those three.
Shameez. Bridget?
Well, it's really hard to choose, but I think Okweke Emezi is, I think she's just extraordinary in terms of writing about identity. And I mean, her book Fresh Water just kind of blew my mind completely, because it just challenges, I mean, the main character in that book has got about, so many different persona that inhabit her. From a sort of Yoruba culture, but also kind of gender issues and so on. It's a fascinating book. So I think she's an extraordinary author. Sipiwe, Glory and Lobo has just written an absolutely magnificent trilogy, which is so also bound-breaking in many ways in terms of her characters. And then, of course, Bettina Gappa is just absolutely fabulous in her book Out of Darkness, Shining Light, which is about the kind of entourage of David Livingstone carrying his body after he died, carrying it through Africa back to the shore so that it could be shipped back to England. And I mean, it's just, obviously the context is extraordinary, but as an exploration of sort of colonialization and history and people within that and how they navigate their humanity within those bizarre and extraordinary conditions it's an amazing book as well.
Thank you so much.
I think I would give perhaps one that is fiction, which is The Seasons of Migration to the North. I think when you realize that Tahib Salih was the first person actually to investigate this notion of an African and immigrant in the West and all those things. It's still a book for me to start from when I want to learn more about the experience of an African, especially in Europe and abroad. But the one that is non-fiction, especially at this time in South Africa, if you really want to understand what is South Africa happening, to me, I would say, Read the Land Matters by advocate Tope. The thing I like about the book is that it is capacious, that and historical, it gives historical background. It starts from the frontier wars, which is my passion, of course. And then it brought everything up to the present stage and tries to tell us why is this country at this present moment where it is today. You understand? And it pleases me how it's the way it deals with issues is not superficial at all. It's got some depth into it. So those are the two that I would perhaps recommend to anybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mphuthumi. Tope, would you like to make any recommendations? What are you reading these days?
I'm reading a lot, but the book that I think is appropriate for this conversation is a book called What We Lose by Zunzi Clemens, which is about a South African American who is also kind of thinking about her South African identity, her American identity. I think and it thinks about she writes about the liberation struggle in South Africa, how that relates to the struggle of African Americans. It's a wonderful book, beautifully written, and it's a book that I've returned to many times over the years.
Thank you, Tope. I see one final question. I know we're a little bit over time, but I see one final hand, and I think it is Miley Al. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Miley
O, please.
Hi from Chile. I have a question. Do you have some topic or subject you can to write in Africa? I think about this because I have a project in Chad, and I have a question about the selection book for the children there, and I think there are topic is not convenient. I don't know. This is my question. Do you have some topic you? Sorry, my English. You can to write?
Thank you so much for this. This is a really wonderful question because we've been talking about this in this realm of memory, identity. What are things that even you still won't touch to this day? To the panelists, what have you been advised not to write about? What have you been told you can't do that here? Have you heard you can't do that here? And what you've heard, what has that been about? What do you not write about? Thank you. That's a great question.
Okay.
I guess the one thing that comes to mind with my work, which is very personal and in certain ways autobiographical, is that not my current editor or agent, but others have said it can't get too personal because you have to think about, the random reader who might come across this and might not relate to that. And I just think that's a really absurd thing to say, because I can't even begin to sort of mention how many books I've read that are deeply personal and include experiences that I've never had before. But I have found a way to connect, especially if the writing is compelling, if the person who's writing it has an understanding of craft and deploys that sort of understanding of craft in a really effective way. I find myself, it's the point of reading, you find yourself immersed in this world that you've never experienced before, and you are in the world of the book. You look around and say, I'm somewhere else. Wow, that's incredible. And this writer has done something wonderful because they've transported me elsewhere. I'm sitting in my living room reading this book and it's slightly cold, but actually I'm, sort of on some quest, to find a ring or something. That's a wonderful thing. So I wish the emphasis, from the publishing world was more about sort of developing your skills as a storyteller and your ability to sort of write narratives that draw people to your work, as opposed to telling folks, that's a little too personal, that's a little too African, that's a little too whatever, sort of think about the big thing. So I guess that's the one thing that comes to mind.
Thank you for that.
For me, on my latest book, The Wanderers, it's a book about the ANC liberation soldier that was stationed in Angola and then in Tanzania, and so outside of Africa. So I felt a lot of people, when I am discussing, especially from the liberation movement, are very uncomfortable about the parts where I expose the corruption, the sexism, the rapes that used to go on there, and how they jailed other people within the ANC liberation movement and also that. And then people are like, but you can't write about that. Those wounds are still fresh. And then we were a liberation movement. We had a moral authority. And I was like, I don't care. You had a moral authority which you betrayed because you became like the enemies you were trying to fight. So I get those discomforts sometimes, and then especially in the upper echelons, people are like, no, you can't write about that. And I was like, we are writers. We're supposed to portray the reality as we know, as we see it, as we understand it. We cannot have holy cows as writers.
Shameez or Bridget?
Yeah, I think for me, the big challenge in my most recent novel, which is coming out early next year. So there are two characters there. They're two sons of a missionary. The one is an adopted Zulu child who was a foundling. And initially, I told the story only from the point of view mainly of the biological son of the missionaries. And I just realized that because, I mean, the reason I did that was, this thing, well, I can't talk for a Black person, so I can't talk for the other child. And yet it actually became, I couldn't fully realize that character until I dived into it and spoke in his voice. And I just said to myself, well, this story's come to me for some reason, it won't let me go. And if people say to me, well, they don't want to publish it, or it's not good, or whatever, then I'll take that. But actually, to honor the story, I just have to do it. So I did that, and I'm sure somewhere along the line I will get some flack for it. But I knew that that was the only way that character could become whole, was if I really immersed myself and spoke, to develop that voice. So yeah, but I don't think really there should be taboos, because we are authors, and of course if we do something badly, if we do it insensitively, if we do it if we don't tell a story well, then we must be criticized for that, but not for what we write about.
I totally agree with that, Bridget. I totally agree. Well done for doing it. I honestly didn't like that excuse that Damon gave, or that he couldn't write a Black character. And I was like, what do you mean you can't write a Black character? You're a novelist. That's your duty to imagine the other, to imagine the other. That is not your experience. So what do you mean that you can't write a Black child? So well done, Bridget. Sorry for jumping in there.
No. Thank you. Shameez, would you like to round us out on this question?
Sure. It's as I mentioned earlier, I steer clear of other people's struggles that I feel I was not part of, and that it is not my story to tell. But at the same time, people do want diversity in stories, and I cannot have a cast of only whatever I am, mixed Indian, Indonesian, Turkish people. It would be a very bland story. So I do believe that we have to tell other people's story, because it does have to be done respectfully and with a group of sensitivity readers, preferably. But aside from race, the same applies to sexuality. I mean, is it okay for me to write a gay love story? Is it okay for me to write a love story between somebody who has a hearing disability? These are not my experiences, and I know that there are mixed feelings from readers as well. Some of them feel that you are profiting off their lives and their struggles that you haven't experienced yourself, whereas others are happy to see themselves there. It is a very careful thing to balance, but I think it's worth looking into depending on the story.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Shameez. I really appreciate that. And you're right, it is worth looking into. It's not just worth looking into, it's worth developing. I think it's very important that, all of you, again, people really underestimate the ways in which writers continually make yourselves vulnerable. You really do. You put so much of yourself out there to be judged by others, right? And it's your heart and your soul. It's who you are. Much of what you do is very autobiographical. It's very biographical, right? It's all of who we are. And so I really want to thank everyone, all of the panelists on this call today, for making yourselves vulnerable in this space, for allowing us to ask you these questions, to have these uncomfortable conversations. And I would recommend everyone that's on this call to lean into this discomfort. I think that one of the things that we lack in society today is open dialogue, open conversation, and just listening to one another. When it comes down to it, we really are all African, right? Who is African? All of us, right? I mean, if you want to talk about it from the perspective of science, all of us are African. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us as members of the human species, as members of the human race, to have these regular conversations about who we are as a people, who we think we are as a nation, who we are as friends, sisters across the seas, as I like to say, for a lot of my South African sisters. So for those of you who are across the seas, sisters and brothers across the sea, thank you all so much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to Catalyst Press for making this possible. Thank you to Ashanta, to Jessica, to Isaac, to all of the people who are on this call today. We truly, truly appreciate your time. Thank you for having us.
And to LitNet too for hosting this. Thank you, LitNet.
Thank you.
Thanks, LitNet. Thank you all so much. Everyone have a wonderful day. I look forward to more conversations in the future.